The first sign of trouble came at dinner time when stumbled through the front door of their small Phoenix apartment, the smell of alcohol thick on his breath. 3-year-old Emma Martinez was sitting at her little plastic table, carefully arranging her chicken nuggets by size, while her mother Sophia cleaned dishes at the kitchen sink. Emma had learned to read the warning signs over the past few months: heavy footsteps, the way his voice changed when he'd been drinking, how Mommy's shoulders would tense up like she was getting ready to run. "Where's my dinner?" His voice cut through the peaceful evening like broken glass. Sophia turned from the sink, water still dripping from her hands, and Emma could see that look in her mother's eyes again, the scared look that made Emma's tummy feel funny. "I saved you a plate, baby. It's in the microwave," Sophia said in that extra sweet voice she used when she was trying to keep happy. Emma watched as her mother hurried to heat up the food, her movements quick and nervous like a bird that knew a cat was watching. Slammed his work boots down at the kitchen table, and Emma's carefully arranged nuggets jumped. She looked up at him with her big brown eyes, hoping he might smile at her like he sometimes did when he wasn't drinking. Instead, he barely seemed to notice she existed. Emma had learned that when was like this, it was better to be invisible. "This food is cold," complained after taking one bite, even though Sophia had heated it for 2 full minutes. "Can't you do anything right?" Emma's stomach twisted as she recognized the tone. She'd heard it before, and it always meant bad things were coming. Quietly, she slipped down from her chair, grabbed her stuffed elephant Mr. Peanuts, and started tiptoeing toward her bedroom. But's voice stopped her. "Where are you going, little princess?" His words were slurred, and when Emma turned around, she saw that fake smile that never reached his eyes. "Don't you want to eat dinner with your daddy?" Emma wasn't sure what to say. Wasn't her real daddy. Her real daddy lived far away and only called sometimes, but had been living with them for 6 months now, and Mommy said she should be nice to him because he helped pay for their apartment. "I'm not hungry anymore," Emma whispered, clutching Mr. Peanuts. Sophia intervened quickly, always trying to smooth things over. She ate most of her nuggets. "Let her go play while we eat together." But something in his expression had changed, turned darker, and Emma felt that scared feeling growing bigger in her chest. The evening continued tensely, with finding fault in everything. The apartment was too messy, the TV was too loud, Sophia had spent too much money at the grocery store. Emma played quietly in her room, but she could hear every word through the thin walls. She lined up her toy animals and made up a story about them finding a safe place to hide when the storm came. By 9 o'clock, Emma was in her pajamas, teeth brushed, and tucked into her little bed with the princess sheets. Sophia read her favorite story about a brave bunny, but Emma could tell her mother was distracted, listening for movements in the living room. When Sophia kissed her goodnight, Emma grabbed her hand. "Mommy, I don't like when gets mad," she whispered. Sophia's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "I know, baby, but sometimes grown-ups have hard days. Loves us, he just gets confused sometimes." But Emma was only 3, and she didn't understand why love looked so much like being scared all the time. Around midnight, Emma woke up to the sound of the television blaring. Through her bedroom door, she could hear his voice getting louder and angrier. He was yelling about losing money, about his boss being unfair, about how nothing in his life ever went right. Emma pulled her covers over her head and tried to go back to sleep, but then she heard Mommy's voice, small and frightened. "Please, you'll wake Emma. Can we talk about this tomorrow when?" "Don't tell me what to do in my own house." His voice exploded through the apartment. "I work all day to keep a roof over your heads, and this is the thanks I get." Emma sat up in bed, her heart beating fast like a little bird's. She crept to her bedroom door and opened it just a crack. In the living room, she could see standing over her mother, who was sitting on the couch looking very small. His hands were moving as he talked, and Emma had learned that when hands moved like that, it meant danger. At 2:17 a.m., Emma's world shattered. The screaming started suddenly, not's angry voice this time, but Mommy's voice, high and terrified. Emma heard something crash, then another crash, and then sounds she didn't understand, but that made her whole body shake with fear. She ran to her closet and squeezed herself into the corner behind her hanging dresses, holding Mr. Peanuts so tight that his little elephant trunk bent. Through the thin wall she could hear shouting terrible words, words that Emma's mommy had told her were never, ever okay to say. She heard Mommy begging, "Please, stop, please." And then came the sound that would haunt Emma's dreams forever, a sound like something heavy hitting the wall, followed by a thud, followed by silence. Emma stayed in that closet for what felt like hours, shivering in her princess pajamas. She wanted to go help Mommy, but her legs wouldn't move. She wanted to call for help, but she was too scared to make any sound at all. In her 3-year-old mind, she thought that if she stayed very, very quiet, maybe the monster would go away. When the red and blue lights finally flooded through her bedroom window, casting strange shadows across her closet, Emma was still frozen in that corner. She heard new voices, strangers calling police, "Open up!" And then's voice, different now, scared and whimpering. She heard heavy footsteps and radios crackling and someone saying, "We need an ambulance now." A kind police officer found Emma in her closet 20 minutes later, still clutching Mr. Peanuts, her eyes wide with shock. "Hey there, sweetheart," Officer Martinez had said gently. "You're safe now. Can you tell me your name?" But Emma couldn't speak. The words were trapped inside her throat, along with the terrible images she'd witnessed and the sounds she'd heard. As the paramedics worked on her unconscious mother in the hallway, as was handcuffed and led away, as neighbors gathered in the hallway whispering and pointing, Emma remained silent. She would stay silent for weeks to come, carrying the weight of that horrible night in her tiny heart, not knowing that her voice, when she finally found it again, would be the key to justice for her mother and protection for countless other families. But first, she would need to heal, and that healing would come from the most unexpected source. A golden-hearted dog named Bailey who understood that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths. Detective Sarah had seen her share of domestic violence cases in her 15 years with the Phoenix Police Department Special Victims Unit, but nothing had prepared her for the sight that greeted her at Phoenix Children's Hospital at 6 a.m. that morning. 3-year-old Emma Martinez sat in a plastic chair that dwarfed her tiny frame, still wearing her princess pajamas now stained with tears and trauma. Her grandmother, Martinez, held her close while rocking back and forth, whispering Spanish prayers that seemed to offer little comfort. Emma hadn't spoken a single word since Officer Martinez found her in the closet. Not to the paramedics, not to the hospital staff, not even to her beloved grandmother who had rushed from Tucson the moment she received the devastating phone call. She simply sat there, clutching her stuffed elephant within grip so tight her knuckles had turned white, staring at something only she could see. "Detective's voice was hoarse from crying. "Please tell me you're going to put that monster away forever. Look what he's done to my Bobbies." She gestured toward the ICU where Sofia Martinez lay unconscious, her face so swollen that she was barely recognizable. The medical report made stomach turn, fractured skull, broken ribs, internal bleeding, and a traumatic brain injury that doctors weren't sure she would fully recover from. Knelt down to Emma's eye level, her voice gentle but professional. "Hi, Emma. I'm Detective. I'm here to help you and your mommy. Can you tell me what happened last night?" Emma's only response was to turn her face away and burrow deeper into her grandmother's embrace. It was as if she had retreated so far inside herself that the outside world couldn't reach her anymore. "She's been like this since they found her," explained, stroking Emma's dark hair. "The doctor says it's shock, but I don't know what to do. She won't eat, won't sleep, won't even cry. It's like she's not really here anymore." Dr. Michael arrived an hour later, carrying a briefcase full of child psychology assessment tools and 20 years of experience working with traumatized children. A soft-spoken man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, He had been court-appointed to evaluate Emma's mental state and determine her ability to testify in what everyone knew would be a critical case. "Mrs. Martinez," Doctor said after introducing himself, "I'm going to need some time alone with Emma to properly assess her condition. I know this is difficult, but—" "No," his voice was sharp with panic. "She hasn't been away from me since last night. What if she gets more scared?" Doctor nodded understandingly. "We'll take this very slowly. Perhaps we can start in your presence and see how she responds." For the next 2 hours, Doctor tried every technique in his considerable arsenal. He brought out colorful toys, picture books, and art supplies. He spoke in English and Spanish. He tried play therapy, sitting quietly nearby, even bringing in a therapy puppet that usually delighted young children. Emma's response to everything was the same: complete, devastating silence. "This is severe psychological trauma," Doctor finally told Detective in the hospital hallway, his voice heavy with concern. "She's exhibiting classic symptoms of selective mutism combined with acute stress reaction. In layman's terms, she's retreated completely into herself as a survival mechanism." Felt her heart sink. "Doctor, I need to ask you the hard question. Will she be able to testify? This little girl is our only eyewitness to what happened. Without her testimony, walks free." Doctor removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a habit recognized as his way of buying time when delivering bad news. "Detective, in her current state, Emma couldn't testify to what she had for breakfast, let alone recount a traumatic assault. The human mind, especially a child's mind, has remarkable protective mechanisms. Right now, Emma's psyche is protecting her by shutting down completely." "How long could this last?" "That's impossible to say. Some children recover in weeks, others take months or even years. Some never fully recover their ability to discuss the traumatic event. And even if she does start speaking again, there's no guarantee she'll be able to recall or verbalize what she witnessed that night." Walked back to Emma's bedside, watching the little girl who held the key to justice in her tiny, traumatized hands. Was currently being held without bail, but knew that without Emma's testimony, the physical evidence alone might not be enough to secure a conviction for attempted murder. Defense attorneys were clever at creating reasonable doubt and could claim Sophia's injuries resulted from an accident during an argument. "There has to be something," muttered to herself, thinking about Sophia fighting for her life just floors above them. "Some way to reach her." Looked up hopefully. "You have children, Detective?" "A daughter about Emma's age," admitted, feeling the familiar pang of parental empathy that made these cases so personally difficult. "Then you understand. Emma was always such a happy child, so full of words and questions. She would talk to everyone, the mailman, grocery store clerks, even strangers at the park. Her mother used to joke that Emma never met a sentence she didn't want to finish." His voice broke. "Now look at her. It's like he didn't just hurt Sophia's body, he murdered Emma's spirit too." Doctor rejoined them, having made several phone calls to colleagues across the state. "Detective, I've been thinking about alternative approaches. There are some experimental therapies for childhood trauma that have shown promise. Animal-assisted therapy, specifically." "You mean like therapy dogs?" "Exactly. Animals, particularly dogs trained for this kind of work, can sometimes reach traumatized children when human intervention fails. There's something about the non-judgmental presence of an animal that can feel safer to a child who's lost trust in the adult world." His mind immediately went to a conversation she'd had just weeks earlier with Officer Jessica Murphy from the department's Community Outreach Division. Murphy had been advocating for expanding their K-9 unit to include therapy dogs specifically trained to work with crime victims, especially children. "I might know someone," said slowly, an idea beginning to form. "But would Emma even be capable of interacting with a therapy animal in her current state?" "It's worth trying," Doctor said. "At this point, conventional therapy isn't making any progress. Sometimes the unconventional approach is exactly what's needed. That evening, as Emma finally fell into a restless sleep in her grandmother's arms at the hospital, sat in his jail cell preparing his defense with his court-appointed attorney. He was confident that, without the little girl's testimony, he could beat the charges or at least get them reduced to simple assault. After all, who would believe the word of a traumatized 3-year-old against his version of events? But didn't know about Bailey. As Detective drove home that night, she found herself thinking about her own daughter sleeping safely in her bed, and about Emma who might never feel truly safe again. She thought about Sophia fighting for her life, and about how justice sometimes hung on the thinnest of threads. Tomorrow, she would make a phone call that would change everything. Tomorrow, she would reach out to Officer Murphy and her extraordinary golden retriever. Because sometimes realized, the most important witnesses come on 4 legs, and the healing that seemed impossible with humans might just be possible with the help of a dog who understood that courage comes in all sizes. Emma's silence would not be permanent. Her voice would return, stronger and braver than anyone imagined. But first, she needed to remember that the world still held kindness, still held safety, still held hope. She needed Bailey. Detective Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she dialed Officer Jessica Murphy's number at 7 a.m. the next morning. She had spent the entire night thinking about Emma's hollow eyes and the impossible task ahead. The prosecutor's office was already pressuring her for a timeline on Emma's recovery, and its attorney was filing motions to have the case dismissed due to lack of credible evidence. Murphy speaking, came a cheerful voice that seemed to carry sunshine even through the phone. "Jessica, it's Sarah from Special Victims. I need to ask you about your therapy dog program. How quickly could you get one of your dogs to work with a traumatized child witness?" There was a pause, and could hear the sound of a dog barking playfully in the background. "Sarah, are we talking about the Martinez case? The 3-year-old who witnessed the domestic assault?" "You heard about it. The whole department's talking about it. That poor baby." Murphy's voice grew serious. "I've actually been hoping someone would call. Bailey and I have been following the case, and I had a feeling we might be needed." Officer Jessica Murphy had joined the Phoenix Police Department 5 years earlier with an unusual background. She held a master's degree in animal psychology, and had spent 3 years working with therapy animals in children's hospitals before deciding to become a police officer. Her vision was to bridge the gap between law enforcement and healing, using specially trained dogs to help crime victims, particularly children, navigate the traumatic aftermath of their experiences. Bailey wasn't Murphy's first therapy dog, but she was certainly her most extraordinary. The 3-year-old golden retriever had been selected as a puppy from a litter specifically bred for temperament and intelligence. From 8 weeks old, Bailey had intensive training that was part service dog preparation, part therapy animal certification, and part specialized police work. "Sarah, before we go any further, I need you to understand something about Bailey," Murphy continued. "She's not just a pet who happens to be friendly with kids. She's been trained to read microexpressions, to sense changes in heart rate and stress hormones, to position herself in ways that provide maximum comfort without being intrusive. She can detect when someone is about to have a panic attack before they even know it themselves." Felt the first glimmer of hope she'd experienced since finding Emma in that hospital chair. "How does it work? I mean, practically speaking." "Well, every child is different, but Bailey has an almost supernatural ability to match her energy to what each individual needs. Some kids need playful interaction to come out of their shells. Others need quiet companionship. Some respond to Bailey performing tricks. Others just want to sit next to her and feel her breathing." Murphy's voice grew more animated as she talked about her partner. "Last month, we worked with a 6-year-old who witnessed a shooting in his neighborhood. He hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 weeks, but within 30 minutes of meeting Bailey, he was telling her everything he saw, not to the adults in the room, mind you, but directly to Bailey, as if she could understand every word, which honestly I sometimes think she can. What makes her so special? Asked, genuinely curious now. It's hard to explain without seeing her in action. Bailey seems to understand that children who've been hurt by adults need to rebuild their trust gradually. She never pushes, never demands attention, never makes sudden movements. She just exists in their space, radiating this incredible sense of safety and acceptance. Murphy paused, then continued with evident pride in her voice. But here's the thing that really sets Bailey apart from other therapy animals. She's been specifically trained for courtroom work. She knows how to remain perfectly still and silent during legal proceedings, how to provide comfort without being a distraction, and how to help children find their courage when they need to speak difficult truths. His pulse quickened. You mean she could potentially help Emma testify? That's exactly what I mean. Bailey has been present for testimony in 43 cases across Arizona, and in 38 of those cases, the child witnesses were able to provide complete, coherent testimony that led to convictions. But Sarah, Murphy's voice grew cautious, Emma's case sounds particularly severe. Are we talking about a child who's completely nonverbal? Hasn't spoken a word since the assault. Complete psychological shutdown, according to Dr. Those are our most challenging cases, but they're also where Bailey tends to work her magic most effectively. The children who retreated furthest into themselves often respond most dramatically to her presence. It's like she gives them permission to feel safe again. 20 minutes later, was driving across town to the Phoenix Police Department's K-9 training facility, a sprawling complex on the outskirts of the city where officers and their canine partners hone their skills. As she pulled into the parking lot, she could hear the sounds of dogs barking and trainers giving commands. Officer Murphy met her at the entrance, a woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair that she claimed was the result of worrying about every child she'd ever worked with. Bailey's finishing up her morning training session, Murphy explained as they walked toward the facility. She's been working on some new calming techniques that might be perfect for Emma. The training facility was impressive, multiple rooms designed to simulate different environments where Bailey might need to work, from hospital rooms to courtrooms to police interview rooms. Through a large window, watched as Bailey performed what looked like an intricate dance with her trainer, responding to subtle hand signals and voice commands with remarkable precision. Bailey was beautiful, even by golden retriever standards. Her coat gleamed like spun gold in the morning sunlight, and her dark brown eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human. She moved with a grace and confidence that spoke of extensive training, but there was something else about her, a gentleness, a sense of purpose that was immediately apparent even to someone watching from a distance. "Bailey, come," Murphy called, and the dog immediately trotted over, her tail wagging but not with the frantic enthusiasm typical of most retrievers. This was a controlled, professional wag, noted with amusement. "Bailey, this is Detective. She has a little girl who needs our help." Felt slightly foolish talking to a dog, but Bailey's response was immediate and remarkable. The retriever sat perfectly still, her intelligent eyes focused intently on his face as if she were listening to every word. When knelt down and extended her hand, Bailey stepped forward and gently placed her head against palm, not demanding attention, but offering comfort as if she sensed the stress and worry that had been consuming for days. "She knows," Murphy said quietly. "She can sense that you're carrying someone else's pain. That's her gift. She feels what others feel, and she knows how to help them carry the burden." Looked into Bailey's warm brown eyes and felt something she hadn't experienced since this case began, genuine hope. "Officer Murphy, when can we introduce Bailey to Emma?" "How about this afternoon? I'll need to coordinate with doctor and get permission from the hospital, but Bailey and I are ready whenever Emma is." As they walked back toward the parking lot, Murphy shared more stories about Bailey's successes. The 8-year-old who had been too terrified to identify his abuser, until Bailey curled up next to him and gave him the courage to speak. The teenage girl who had shut down after a sexual assault but found her voice again while stroking Bailey's soft fur. The 5-year-old who had witnessed his father's murder and couldn't stop shaking until Bailey placed her head on his lap and stayed there for 3 hours straight. The thing about trauma, Murphy explained, is that it makes children feel powerless and afraid. Bailey gives them back their sense of safety and control. She lets them set the pace, make the decisions about interaction, and most importantly, she shows them that they can trust again. Thought about Emma, still sitting in that hospital chair, still clutching her stuffed elephant, still lost in a silence that seemed impenetrable. Could this remarkable dog really reach her when human experts had failed? "There's something else you should know," Murphy added as they reached his car. "Bailey has never failed to help a child find their voice again. It might take time, it might happen gradually, but she's never met a traumatized child she couldn't reach eventually. And Sarah," Murphy's eyes grew determined, "Bailey has a particular talent for helping children tell the truth in ways that courts can understand. If anyone can help Emma testify, it's her." As drove back toward the hospital, she felt a strange sense of anticipation. Emma was about to meet someone very special, a 4-legged therapist who understood that sometimes healing came not through words, but through the simple, profound presence of unconditional love and acceptance. Bailey was coming to the rescue, and his confident smirk was about to disappear forever. The County Child Advocacy Center on East Van Street was designed to feel like anything but a government building. Soft pastel walls, comfortable furniture, and carefully chosen artwork created an environment that whispered safety rather than shouting institutional authority. As Detective pulled into the parking lot at 2 p.m. that Thursday afternoon, she noticed how different this place felt from the sterile hospital corridors, where Emma had spent the past 4 days. Martinez sat in the passenger seat, her weathered hands gripping a small overnight bag containing Emma's favorite blanket, 3 changes of clothes, and Mr. Peanuts, the stuffed elephant that hadn't left Emma's side since that terrible night. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Detective?" His voice carried the exhaustion of a grandmother who had barely slept since her world turned upside down. "She's been through so much already." "Mrs. Martinez, I know this is scary, but Emma needs help that we can't give her at the hospital. Doctor believes this could be the breakthrough she needs." Turned to look at the older woman, seeing her own mother in worried eyes. "And if it doesn't work, we haven't lost anything by trying." Emma sat in her car seat behind them, dressed in a soft yellow sundress that had brought from home, hopping familiar clothes might provide some comfort. She stared out the window with that same vacant expression that had haunted her dreams, her small fingers working constantly over Mr. Peanut's worn fabric ears, a nervous habit that had developed since the assault. Doctor met them at the entrance, his gentle demeanor immediately putting at ease. "The room is all prepared," he explained as they walked through corridors decorated with children's artwork and inspirational messages. "Officer Murphy and Bailey arrived an hour ago to give Bailey time to acclimate to the space. She's quite remarkable. I've been observing her preparation routine." "What kind of preparation?" asked, curious despite her nervousness. "Bailey has been systematically exploring every corner of the room, learning the scents, the acoustics, the lighting. Officer Murphy says she's mapping the emotional landscape of the space so she can position herself optimally when Emma arrives. It's fascinating to watch. She's not just a therapy dog. She's a professional preparing for the most important meeting of her career." They paused outside the Rainbow Room, a comfortable space with soft couches, colorful rugs, and natural lighting that filtered through gauze curtains. Through the observation window, could see Officer Murphy sitting quietly in one corner while Bailey lay in the center of the room, her golden head resting on her paws, completely still but obviously alert. "She's been in that exact position for 20 minutes, Doctor whispered. "Murphy says Bailey has calculated that spot as the optimal location, close enough to be noticed, far enough away to not seem threatening, positioned so Emma can approach from any direction without feeling cornered. Emma showed no reaction to seeing Bailey through the window. Her expression remained blank, her body language unchanged. But noticed that her fingers had stopped working over Mr. Peanut's ears, as if some part of her subconscious had registered something different about this room. "Remember," Doctor addressed, and we let Emma set the pace completely. No encouragement, no suggestions, no pushing. Bailey will handle the interaction according to her training, and we simply observe and support whatever Emma chooses to do. The door opened quietly, and Murphy looked up with a reassuring smile. "Hello, Emma," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Jessica, and this is my friend Bailey. We're just spending some quiet time in here if you'd like to join us." Bailey didn't move a muscle. Her eyes tracked Emma's movement as guided her to a chair near the door, but the dog remained in her calculated position, patient as a statue. Emma clutched Mr. Peanuts and pressed herself against her grandmother's side, but her eyes, for the first time in days, were focused on something specific rather than staring into the distance. For 20 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Emma sat frozen in her chair while Bailey maintained her position with supernatural patience, shifted nervously, and found herself holding her breath. Doctor took notes on his clipboard, documenting every microexpression and body language cue. Then Bailey did something extraordinary. Without warning, the golden retriever rolled onto her back, exposing her belly in the universal canine gesture of vulnerability and playfulness. But this wasn't random. Murphy later explained that Bailey had detected a nearly imperceptible change in Emma's breathing pattern, a slight relaxation of her rigid posture that indicated her stress level had decreased enough to potentially accept interaction. The movement was so unexpected, so gentle and non-threatening, that Emma's eyes widened slightly. For the first time since that horrible night, something had surprised her in a way that wasn't terrifying. Bailey remained on her back, her tail giving the softest possible wag, her pink tongue lolling out slightly in an expression of pure, innocent joy. "She's asking Emma to be her friend," Murphy whispered, so quietly that only the adults could hear. "Bailey only shows her belly to children she senses are ready for the next step." Emma's grip on Mr. Peanuts loosened slightly. Her head tilted a few degrees to the right, the first voluntary movement she'd made in days that wasn't defensive. Felt the change immediately, the slight relaxation in Emma's small body, the shift from rigid terror to cautious curiosity. Bailey let out the softest possible whine, not distressed, but inviting, like a puppy asking for attention. It was a sound calculated to trigger every protective and nurturing instinct in a child's psychology. Emma's lips parted slightly, though no sound emerged. "She wants to go closer," whispered, feeling Emma's weight shift forward infinitesimally. "Let her decide," Doctor cautioned. "This has to be completely her choice." For another 10 minutes, Emma remained in her chair, studying Bailey with growing fascination. The dog had become the most interesting thing in her world, not threatening like the human adults who asked questions and made demands, not painful like the memories that haunted her dreams, but mysterious and safe, and somehow magnetic. Finally, Emma slid down from her chair. His breath caught in her throat as her granddaughter took one tentative step toward Bailey, then another. Mr. Peanuts dragged on the floor behind her as Emma approached the upside-down dog with the cautiousness of a wild animal approaching something that might be food or might be a trap. Bailey remained perfectly still, even as Emma crept closer. When Emma was within arm's reach, Bailey's tail gave the gentlest wag as if to say, "Hello, little friend. I've been waiting for you." Emma stopped just inches from Bailey's outstretched paws. For a long moment, girl and dog simply looked at each other, Emma studying this strange, patient creature who had no expectations, no demands, no agenda beyond simply being present. Then, with the careful deliberation of someone defusing a bomb, Emma reached out one tiny finger and touched Bailey's soft paw pad. The effect was electric, not dramatic or sudden but profound in its gentleness. Emma's shoulders dropped slightly as some invisible tension released. Her breathing deepened, and for the first time in 4 days, her face showed something other than blank terror. It showed wonder. Bailey remained motionless except for her eyes, which tracked Emma's movements with protective alertness. When Emma's touch lingered on her paw, Bailey's tail wagged once, very slowly, acknowledging the contact without overwhelming the fragile moment. "Good girl, Bailey," Murphy whispered, and Emma's head turned slightly toward the sound. It was the first time she'd acknowledged another human being's presence since the assault. Emma's hand moved from Bailey's paw to her soft belly fur. The tactile sensation seemed to ground her in the present moment, pulling her away from whatever internal nightmare she'd been trapped in. Her fingers worked through the golden fur with the same repetitive motion she'd been using on Mr. Peanut's ears. But this was different. This was soothing rather than anxious. "She's self-regulating," Doctor noted quietly. "The repetitive motion with Bailey's fur is helping her nervous system calm down. This is exactly what we hoped would happen." After several minutes of gentle touching, Emma did something that made gasp. She lay down on the soft carpet next to Bailey, positioning herself so she could continue stroking the dog's fur while resting her head on her own arm. It was the first time she'd voluntarily made herself comfortable anywhere since the assault. Bailey very slowly rolled back onto her side, careful not to startle Emma, and positioned herself so the little girl could continue touching her fur. The two of them lay there together, a traumatized child and a therapy dog who understood exactly how to help her heal. And then, so softly that the adults had to strain to hear it, Emma whispered 2 words that sent tears streaming down her cheeks. "Nice doggy." They were the first words she'd spoken since that terrible night, and they were spoken not to any of the adults who'd been trying to reach her, but to Bailey, who had simply offered the gift of patient, unconditional presence. The healing had begun. The County Superior Court building on West Street buzzed with unusual energy on the morning of September 15th. Word had spread throughout the legal community about the unprecedented motion being argued in Courtroom 4B, a request to allow a therapy dog to accompany a 3-year-old witness during her testimony in a felony assault case. Defense attorney arrived early, his leather briefcase stuffed with legal precedents and constitutional arguments designed to keep Emma Martinez off the witness stand entirely. Was a seasoned criminal defense attorney with 23 years of experience getting violent men reduced sentences or complete acquittals. At 52, he had silver hair, expensive suits, and a reputation for finding legal loopholes that prosecutors never saw coming. His case should have been straightforward: claim the assault was self-defense, argue that Sofia Martinez had been drinking too, suggest that her injuries resulted from an accidental fall during a mutual altercation. Without Emma's testimony, it would be sworn against physical evidence that could be explained away. But now there was a complication named Bailey. "Your Honor," began when Judge called the hearing to order. "The defense strenuously objects to this unprecedented and prejudicial request. Allowing a dog in my client's trial violates his constitutional right to a fair proceeding and creates an atmosphere of sympathy that will unfairly influence the jury." Judge, a 48-year-old former prosecutor with a reputation for fairness and innovation, studied the motion carefully. She had been on the bench for 8 years and had never encountered a request quite like this one. The legal brief submitted by Prosecutor Foster was thorough, citing cases from 12 other states where therapy animals had been permitted during child testimony, but Arizona had no specific precedent. "Mr. Judge said, what specific prejudice do you claim would result from the presence of a therapy dog?" Stood, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to dominating courtrooms. "Your Honor, the very presence of acute, cuddly animal will evoke emotional responses from jurors that have nothing to do with the facts of this case. Jurors will see a traumatized child clinging to a therapy dog and automatically assume my client is guilty before hearing any evidence. Prosecutor Foster, a 36-year-old rising star in the district attorney's office, rose to respond. She had spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment, knowing that Emma's testimony was absolutely crucial for securing conviction. Sophia Martinez remained in rehabilitation, her traumatic brain injury leaving her unable to recall the details of that night clearly enough to provide coherent testimony. "Your Honor," Foster began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was requesting, "the state is not asking for anything that would compromise Mr.'s right to a fair trial. The therapy dog would be positioned completely out of the jury's view, serving solely to provide emotional support that enables this child witness to testify at all." Foster opened her briefcase and a thick folder of documentation. "We have statements from Dr. Michael, the court-appointed child psychologist, confirming that Emma Martinez cannot provide testimony without Bailey's presence. We also have declarations from Officer Jessica Murphy detailing Bailey's specific training for courtroom environments, and documentation of Bailey's successful participation in 43 similar cases across 7 states." Judge leaned forward with interest. "Ms. Foster, explain to me exactly how this would work practically. Where would the dog be positioned? How do we ensure the jury isn't influenced by its presence?" "Your Honor, we propose that Bailey be positioned directly in front of the witness stand, below the jury's line of sight. Emma would be able to see and touch Bailey for comfort, but the dog would be completely invisible to the jury members. Bailey has been trained to remain motionless and silent during proceedings. She's essentially a living piece of courtroom furniture that happens to provide crucial psychological support." Jumped to his feet. "Objection. This is a criminal trial, not a therapy session. There's no legal precedent in Arizona for allowing animals in courtrooms, and the potential for prejudice far outweighs any alleged benefit to the witness." "Actually, Mr. Judge said, consulting her notes, there is some precedent. In 2019, county allowed a therapy dog during the testimony of a 7-year-old sexual assault victim, and the Arizona Court of Appeals upheld the conviction on appeal. However, I understand your concerns about the uniqueness of this situation." The judge turned to Foster. "Ms. Foster, what assurances can you provide that the dog's presence won't create unfair prejudice against the defendant?" Foster had anticipated this question and was ready with her response. "Your Honor, we're prepared to stipulate that the jury be informed that Emma requires special accommodation to testify, without specifying the nature of that accommodation. We can also arrange for the jury to meet Bailey before testimony begins, in a neutral context, so they understand she's a working professional animal, not a pet designed to evoke sympathy." Doctor, who had been called as an expert witness for this hearing, was invited to address the court. His testimony was both clinical and heartbreaking as he described Emma's psychological state and the breakthrough she'd experienced with Bailey. "Your Honor," Doctor explained, "Emma Martinez has been diagnosed with severe PTSD and selective mutism resulting from witnessing extreme domestic violence. In 4 weeks of traditional therapy, she showed minimal progress. However, within 30 minutes of meeting Bailey, she spoke her first words since the assault. More importantly, she has now been able to describe in age-appropriate language what she witnessed that night, but only when Bailey is present." Judge asked the question everyone was thinking. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, would Emma be able to testify without the therapy dog present?" "No, Your Honor. Without Bailey, Emma returns to her previous nonverbal state. The dog provides what we call a secure base that allows Emma to access traumatic memories without being overwhelmed by them. Bailey essentially serves as Emma's emotional anchor during the most difficult conversation of her young life." Cross-examination was aggressive but ultimately ineffective. He tried to suggest that Emma's attachment to Bailey was artificial, that her testimony might be coached or unreliable, that the whole situation was designed to manipulate the jury's emotions. But Doctor's responses were measured and professional, backed by extensive documentation and video recordings of Emma's sessions. "Mr. Doctor said calmly, Emma's improvement with Bailey is not a performance. It's a genuine therapeutic breakthrough that allows her to function despite severe trauma. We're not asking Bailey to make Emma's testimony more believable. We're asking Bailey to make Emma's testimony possible at all." The courtroom gallery was packed with observers from the legal community, child advocacy groups, and local media. This case was setting precedent that would affect how Arizona courts handled child witnesses for years to come. Detectives sat in the front row, having spent sleepless nights worrying that legal technicalities might prevent Emma from getting justice for her mother. Officer Murphy sat nearby with Bailey, who had been allowed into the courtroom for a brief demonstration of her courtroom behavior. The golden retriever lay perfectly still beside Murphy's chair, completely unfazed by the formal atmosphere, the raised voices of the attorneys, or the tension filling the room. Her presence was both professional and calming, exactly as Foster had described. Judge called for a 30-minute recess to review the submitted materials and consider the arguments. During the break, Huddled With, who had been brought from jail for the hearing, his confidence was visibly shaken. He had been counting on Emma being too traumatized to testify, and now it appeared she might not only testify but do so in a way that would be particularly compelling to a jury. When court reconvened, Judge's decision would change the course of Arizona legal history. After careful consideration of the arguments presented, the applicable law, and the unique circumstances of this case, Judge began, her voice carrying the weight of precedent. This court finds that the state's request is reasonable and necessary to ensure that justice can be served while protecting the rights of all parties involved. The courtroom held its collective breath. Bailey will be permitted to accompany Emma Martinez during her testimony, subject to the following conditions. First, the dog must remain completely out of the jury's line of sight. Second, the jury will be informed in neutral terms that the witness requires special accommodation, without specifying the nature of that accommodation. Third, any disruption caused by the animal's presence will result in immediate removal. And fourth, this accommodation is granted solely to enable testimony that would otherwise be impossible to obtain. Foster felt a wave of relief wash over her, while immediately began preparing his appeal strategy. But Judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she continued, "this court notes that the presence of a therapy animal serves the interests of justice by enabling truthful testimony from a witness who would otherwise be unable to participate in legal proceedings. The defense's concerns about prejudice, while understandable, are outweighed by the state's compelling interest in presenting all available evidence to the jury." As the hearing concluded, the battle lines were drawn. Would face trial with Emma's testimony intact, supported by a four-legged advocate who had already transformed a silent, traumatized child into a witness capable of seeking justice. The real trial was still to come, but Emma and Bailey had won their first victory together. The valley was eerily quiet now, a silence that felt heavier than the storm of bullets that had just passed. Smoke still curled from blackened patches of scrub, mingling with the sharp metallic tang of blood and gunpowder. Chief Blake crouched low, rifle tight against his chest, eyes locked on the ridge where the phantom silhouette had vanished. The man was gone. Not even a glint of movement remained. His pulse was still racing. Moments ago, death had been inches away. Now they were breathing barely, bloodied but alive. He turned to his men, slumped against a rock, arm tied hastily with a field dressing that was already seeping through. Hayes knelt over Cole, still applying pressure to the wound, face grim. Daniels crouched on one knee, scanning the perimeter with the cold patience of a sniper who didn't trust silence. Blake swallowed hard, his voice gravel when it came. Sound off. Banged up, still here. Daniels, good. Hayes, holding Chief. Cole still with us, but barely. Cole groaned weakly, a sound that was half pain, half defiance. His eyes fluttered open, catching Blake for a moment before sliding shut again. Relief rippled through the Chief. His team was hurt, battered, but intact. A miracle. No, not a miracle, a man. Blake's gaze cut back to the ridge. Whoever had been up there had chosen his shots with precision. He hadn't just fired at random, he had hunted. Picked the fighters who mattered. The RPG gunner, the squad leaders, the one about to flank. Every shot had been purposeful, surgical. That was no insurgent. Daniels spoke what Blake was already thinking. Chief, those weren't militia rounds. Those were ours. I'd bet my rifle on it. Let out a strained laugh. What? You mean some ghost sniper just happened to be on our side of the mountain at the right time? Sounds like a hell of a coincidence. Not a coincidence, Blake muttered. He adjusted his grip on his rifle, scanning the high rocks. His instincts screamed louder than ever. Whoever it was, he was trained like them, moved like them, shot like them. Question is, Hayes said, voice tight, if he's one of ours, why isn't he with us? Blake didn't answer, because he didn't know. The radio on his vest crackled, pulling his attention. Falcon 2-1, this is Overlord. Bird is inbound. ETA 15 minutes. Say again 1-5. Mark LZ for extraction. Blake pressed the transmit button. Copy, Overlord holding out. He released the radio, eyes narrowing at the 15 minutes. That was a long time in these mountains. The insurgents might be regrouping. Reinforcements could be on their way, or that phantom sniper could still be out there watching them. He didn't like being watched. Daniels, Blake said quietly, you saw him too. The sniper gave a curt nod, caught his silhouette, high ground, South Ridge, maybe 400 meters, solid shooting position, but soon as the fight turned, gone. Gone. Daniels' expression didn't waver. Ghosted, no trace. Coughed a laugh, though his face was pale from blood loss. So what? We got ourselves a guardian angel with a rifle. Guy shows up, saves our asses, then bails. Guardian angels don't shoot like that, Daniels said flatly. That was training, years of it. Blake said nothing, but his mind was running hot. The precision, the timing, the silence afterward, everything about it nagged at him. If this man had been American, why hadn't Command mentioned an Overwatch element? Why had Overlord acted like they were alone? Unless Command didn't know. Unless he wasn't supposed to be there. Hayes broke the silence, his voice edged with tension. Chief, we need that bird. Cole's fatting fast. Blake snapped back to reality, crouching beside them. Cole's skin was waxy, his pulse weak under Blake's fingers. 15 minutes might as well be a lifetime. Stay with me, Cole, Blake muttered, voice low, steady. You're not dying here, you hear me. Cole gave a faint nod, lips pressed in pain. Blake rose again, rifle ready. He scanned the high ridges, the endless teeth of rock surrounding them. Every shadow looked like a rifle barrel, every silence like a trap waiting to spring. He couldn't shake the thought, the shooter was still out there, watching. Daniels' voice came calm but certain. Chief, he's military, could be Delta, could be a contractor. Hell, could be CIA, but he's not Taliban. That much I'll bet my life on. Chuckled weakly, guess we already did. Blake smirked despite himself, but his mind stayed sharp. He didn't like mysteries in combat. He needed to know who was on his battlefield. Ally or not, someone with that kind of reach could change everything. Minutes crawled by. The team held their ground, weapons sweeping arcs, nerves raw. Every sound carried meaning, the clatter of loose rocks, the whisper of wind. Blake's eyes returned again and again to the South Ridge. But there was nothing, no flash of glass, no movement, just silence. When the thump of rotor blades finally rolled through the valley, relief came like a tidal wave. The Black Hawk swept low, dust exploding outward as it flared for landing. The crew chief leaned out, waving frantically. "Move," Blake barked. "Go, go, go." Staggered forward, weapons still clutched tight despite his bleeding arm. Hayes and Daniels lifted Cole between them, carrying him across the rocky ground. Blake covered the rear, eyes locked on the one last time. As the team clambered into the bird, Blake lingered for a heartbeat, staring up at the cliffs. He couldn't see him, but he knew. Someone had been there. Someone had chosen to intervene. And someone had vanished just as quickly. The chief stepped into the helicopter, the door gunner slamming it shut as the rotors screamed. The bird lifted, banking away from the valley, the battlefield shrinking beneath them. Blake finally allowed himself a breath. They were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. But his mind was already working. Because somewhere out there, in the unforgiving mountains, a hidden sniper had tilted the scales of death in their favor. And Blake had a feeling this was not the last time their paths would cross. October 3rd dawned gray and overcast in Phoenix, as if the sky itself understood the gravity of what would unfold in Courtroom 4B that morning. Emma Martinez woke up in her grandmother's apartment wearing her favorite purple dress with tiny white flowers, the same dress she had worn to her 4th birthday party just 2 weeks earlier. Before anyone knew, she would need to be brave in ways no child should ever have to be. Had barely slept, spending most of the night praying and checking on Emma, who had slept peacefully with Bailey curled up on a special bed beside her own. Judge had granted the unusual permission for Bailey to stay overnight with Emma, recognizing that their bond had become essential to Emma's emotional stability. Officer Murphy had slept on his couch, maintaining her professional responsibility for Bailey while ensuring both dog and child felt secure. "Today's a big day," whispered as she helped Emma with her shoes, little black Mary Janes that made soft clicking sounds on the tile floor. Emma had practiced walking in these shoes so the sound wouldn't startle her in the echoing courtroom. "I know, Abuela. Bailey and me are going to tell everyone what happened to Mommy." Emma's voice held a matter-of-fact courage that broke's heart and filled her with pride simultaneously. This little girl had somehow found strength that many adults never discover. The County Superior Court building buzzed with unusual energy as news crews set up outside, having learned about the unprecedented case involving the youngest witness in Arizona legal history. Inside, Courtroom 4B had been carefully prepared according to judge specifications. The witness stand had been modified with a booster seat designed to look dignified rather than childish, and a small area directly in front had been marked with tape to show Bailey's designated position. Sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting suit that his public defender had insisted would make him look less threatening, but no amount of grooming could hide the cold calculation in his eyes as he watched the courtroom fill with potential jurors. At 34, had a history of domestic violence that couldn't be introduced as evidence, but his demeanor radiated barely contained aggression that made even seasoned court officers uncomfortable. Reviewed his notes one final time, knowing this would be the most challenging cross-examination of his career. His strategy was carefully calculated. Suggest that Emma's memories were unreliable due to trauma, imply that her testimony had been coached by well-meaning adults, and argue that a 3-year-old couldn't possibly provide accurate testimony about events she witnessed during a terrifying situation. "All rise for the honorable judge," the bailiff announced, and the packed courtroom stood as one. Media representatives, victim advocates, legal observers, and members of Emma's extended family filled every available seat. This trial would set precedent that would echo through Arizona courts for decades to come. Foster felt the familiar pre-testimony nerves that every prosecutor experiences before calling their most crucial witness. She had prosecuted complex cases involving organized crime, white-collar fraud, and capital murder, but never had she felt the weight of justice resting so completely on the shoulders of someone so small and vulnerable. "The state calls Emma Martinez to the witness stand," Foster announced, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. Emma appeared at the courtroom's rear door, walking slowly but steadily between Officer Murphy and Dr. Bailey walked calmly beside Emma, her golden coat freshly brushed and gleaming under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. The therapy dog wore her official vest, identifying her as a working animal, her demeanor professional and alert. The courtroom held its collective breath as this unusual procession made its way down the center aisle. Emma's tiny hand rested on Bailey's head, drawing strength from the familiar contact. Her purple dress with white flowers made her look even smaller than her 4 years, a reminder to everyone present of the profound injustice that had brought them to this moment. Shifted in his chair as Emma approached the witness stand, and for just an instant, his carefully maintained facade cracked. The sight of the little girl he had terrorized, now walking bravely toward the witness stand to testify against him, seemed to penetrate his psychological armor. His lawyer noticed the reaction and placed a warning hand on his arm. Judge had arranged for the jury to be seated before Emma entered, eliminating the potentially intimidating experience of having 12 strangers watch her walk to the witness stand. As Emma climbed into the specially designed chair, Bailey moved smoothly to her designated position directly below the witness box, completely invisible to the jury but perfectly positioned for Emma to see and touch. The courtroom was so quiet that Emma's soft-soled shoes clicking against the witness stand steps sounded like gunshots in the silence. She settled into the chair with practiced ease, the result of weeks of preparation, and immediately looked down at Bailey, who gazed back with those intelligent brown eyes that promised safety and courage. "Good morning, Emma," Foster began, her voice gentle but clear enough to carry to the back of the courtroom. "Can you tell everyone your name?" "Emma Martinez," came the response, spoken in a voice that was small but surprisingly clear. "I'm 4 years old." The jury, 7 women and 5 men ranging in age from 28 to 64, leaned forward slightly, straining to hear every word. Several jury members had children and the sight of Emma in the witness chair created an immediate emotional connection that had feared from the beginning. "Emma, do you see your friend Bailey down there?" Foster continued, following the script they had rehearsed dozens of times. Emma's face lit up with the first smile the courtroom had seen. "Yes. Hi, Bailey." She wiggled her fingers in a tiny wave, and Bailey's tail gave the slightest movement in response, barely perceptible but enough to maintain their connection. "Emma, I want you to know that if you get scared or need to take a break, you just tell me, okay? Bailey will be right there the whole time." "Okay," Emma replied, her small hand reaching down to touch Bailey's head. The physical contact seemed to ground her, preparing her for the questions that would follow. Foster established Emma's with simple questions about her address, her grandmother's name, and her understanding of truth versus lies. Emma's responses were clear and consistent, delivered in the matter-of-fact way that only children possess. She knew her full address, understood that lying was wrong, and could distinguish between real events and pretend games. "Emma, do you remember living with your mommy and daddy?" Foster asked, carefully introducing the difficult topic. Emma's posture changed slightly, her shoulders tensing as they always did when his name was mentioned, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, Daddy lived with us for lots of months. He wasn't my real daddy, but Mommy said I should be nice to him." "Did you like Daddy?" Emma considered this question with the seriousness that children bring to important topics. Sometimes he was nice, but sometimes he was scary, especially when he drank the bad-smell drinks. Several jury members exchanged glances at this description of alcohol from a child's perspective. Emma's innocent terminology made her testimony more compelling than any expert witness could have been. "Emma, do you remember a night when scary things happened at your house?" Foster asked, approaching the core of her testimony. Emma's grip on Bailey's fur tightened, and her breathing became slightly more rapid. But weeks of preparation had taught her that she could visit these memories safely, that Bailey would keep her anchored to the present moment. "Yes," Emma whispered, "the night when Daddy hurt Mommy really bad." The courtroom was so silent that the sound of his breathing seemed unnaturally loud. His defense attorney scribbled notes frantically, already planning his cross-examination strategy. But looking at Emma, small, brave, and protected by a golden retriever who radiated calm strength, realized his task would be more difficult than he had anticipated. "Can you tell me what happened that night, Emma?" Foster asked gently. Emma looked down at Bailey, who gazed back with infinite patience and love. Drawing strength from that connection, Emma began to tell her story in words that would change life forever. But the most crucial moment was still to come. The moment when Emma would have to identify the man who had shattered her family, the man who sat just 20 feet away, hoping that a 4-year-old's courage would fail at the moment it mattered most. Emma was about to prove him wrong. The courtroom held its breath as Prosecutor Foster approached the moment that would determine his fate. Emma sat in the witness chair, her small hand resting on Bailey's golden head, drawing strength from the therapy dog who had become her lifeline to courage. The jury leaned forward, 12 faces reflecting the gravity of what they were about to hear from the lips of a 4-year-old child. "Emma," Foster said softly, her voice carrying the weight of justice across the silent courtroom, "I need to ask you a very important question. Can you look around the courtroom and tell me if you see the person who hurt your mommy that night?" Emma's breathing quickened, and her grip on Bailey's fur tightened. This was the moment Doctor had prepared her for, the moment Officer Murphy had promised Bailey would help her through, the moment that would either convict a violent man or set him free to hurt someone else's family. Bailey sensed Emma's rising anxiety immediately. The golden retriever shifted slightly, positioning herself so Emma could lean forward and bury her face in the soft fur if needed. Bailey's calm, steady breathing provided a rhythmic anchor that reminded Emma she was safe, that she was brave, that she could do this impossible thing. Emma's eyes slowly swept the courtroom. She looked at the jury box, where 12 strangers watched her with encouraging expressions. She looked at the gallery, where her grandmother sat in the front row, tears streaming down her cheeks, hands clasped in prayer. She looked at Judge, who offered the slightest nod of encouragement. And then Emma's gaze landed on the defense table. Sat rigid in his chair, his attorney's hand on his arm in a gesture meant to appear supportive but which was actually restraining. His carefully maintained facade was cracking under the intensity of a 4-year-old stare. This was the man who had terrorized Emma's family, who had left her mother fighting for her life, who had shattered a little girl's sense of safety in the world. But Emma was no longer the terrified child who had hidden in a closet 6 months earlier. She was a survivor who had found her voice with Bailey's help, and she was not going to let this man hurt anyone else. "Emma," Foster prompted gently, "do you see the person who hurt Mommy?" Emma looked down at Bailey, whose intelligent brown eyes seemed to say, "You can do this, little one. I'm right here with you." Emma drew a deep breath, the kind of breath that comes before the most important words of your life. "Yes," Emma said, her voice small but clear as crystal in the silent courtroom. "He's sitting right there." She pointed directly at, her tiny finger unwavering despite the magnitude of what she was doing. "Can you tell me his name, sweetheart?" Foster asked, though she already knew the answer that would seal his fate. Emma's voice cracked with emotion, but her words rang out with devastating clarity. "Daddy." The impact was immediate and electric. Several jury members gasped audibly. His face went white as paper, and his defense attorney frantically scribbled notes, knowing his case had just collapsed. In the gallery, Martinez sobbed openly while other family members reached for tissues and held each other. But Emma wasn't finished. The dam had broken, and 6 months of suppressed trauma came pouring out in words that would haunt everyone in that courtroom for the rest of their lives. "He was really mean to my mommy," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger as Bailey's presence gave her courage. "He used scary words and made her cry. Then he hit her really, really hard and made her fall down. She couldn't get up anymore and there was red stuff on her face. Foster felt tears burning her eyes but maintained her professional composure. "Emma, what did you do when this happened?" "I was scared, so I hid it in my closet with Mr. Peanuts. I wanted to help Mommy, but I was too little." Emma's hand moved rhythmically through Bailey's fur, the repetitive motion helping her process the traumatic memories. "I heard Mommy making hurt sounds, and then everything got quiet. The quiet was worse than the scary sounds." The courtroom was absolutely still except for the soft sounds of crying from the gallery. Even the court reporter seemed to be typing more quietly, as if afraid to disturb the profound moment of a child finding the courage to speak truth to power. "Emma, you're being so brave," Foster said, meaning every word. "Is there anything else you remember about that night?" Emma nodded solemnly. "When the police came with the red and blue lights, Daddy was crying and saying he was sorry, but Mommy was sleeping and wouldn't wake up. The nice police lady found me in my closet and told me I was safe now." Knew his cross-examination would have to be extremely careful. Attacking a 4-year-old witness aggressively would alienate the jury completely, but he had to try to create some reasonable doubt about Emma's reliability. "Emma," began when Judge nodded for him to proceed. "That was a very scary night, wasn't it?" "Yes, it was the scariest night ever," Emma replied honestly. "Sometimes when we're really scared, it's hard to remember things exactly right. Are you sure you remember everything perfectly?" Emma considered this question with the seriousness that children bring to important matters. "I remember the important parts. Bailey helped me remember so I could tell everyone and keep other mommies safe." Strategy was backfiring. Emma's innocent reference to protecting other families made her testimony even more compelling. He tried a different approach. "Emma, do you know what happens to people who don't tell the truth in court?" "Yes," Emma said matter-of-factly. "They get in trouble because lying is wrong. That's why I'm telling the truth about what Daddy did to Mommy." Realized he was making Emma's testimony stronger with every question. He quickly concluded his cross-examination, having failed to create any doubt about Emma's credibility. When Emma was finally allowed to step down from the witness stand, she walked directly to Bailey and wrapped her small arms around the dog's neck. "We did it, Bailey," she whispered, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "We told everyone the truth." The jury deliberated for exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes, just long enough to elect a foreman and fill out the paperwork. Was found guilty on all charges: aggravated assault, domestic violence, and child endangerment. He would be sentenced to 15 years in prison without the possibility of parole. As was led away in handcuffs, he looked back once at Emma, who stood holding Bailey's leash in the gallery. The little girl who had once cowered in a closet met his gaze steadily, no longer afraid of the monster who had tried to destroy her family. 6 months later, Emma's mother Sophia had recovered enough to return home. Her speech was still slightly slurred from the brain injury, and she would always walk with a slight limp, but she was alive, and she was safe. Most importantly, she was reunited with the daughter whose extraordinary courage had ensured that would never hurt their family again. Emma started pre-kindergarten that fall, a bright, talkative child who showed no signs of the trauma that had once rendered her silent. Bailey visited her regularly, and Emma always introduced the golden retriever as my best friend who helped me be brave. The case set legal precedent across Arizona and inspired similar programs in 6 other states. Emma's testimony proved that, with proper support, even the youngest victims could find their voices and seek justice. Bailey became something of a celebrity in law enforcement circles, but to Emma, she would always be simply the friend who helped her change 2 words, Daddy, into the key that locked away a monster and set her family free. Years later, when Emma was old enough to fully understand what she had accomplished, she would say that she didn't remember being scared that day in court. She only remembered Bailey's warm fur beneath her fingers and the feeling that they were doing something very important together. 2 words had changed everything. 2 words had brought justice. 2 words spoken by the bravest witness the Arizona court system had ever seen, a 4-year-old girl and her golden-hearted companion who understood that courage comes in all sizes, and that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths. Emma Martinez and Bailey had proven that justice has no age limit, and that with the right support, even the most traumatized victims can find the strength to make their voices heard. The monster was behind bars, the family was safe, and a little girl who had once hidden in a closet had grown up to become a hero.